Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Consider this my debut YouTube video about my new channel that I'm going to use to hopefully teach some people about cars or how to work on cars, how to take care of your cars for those who may not know. So I'm going to start off with my first video being a review of the car I'm going to use for these videos, being my 2008 Honda Fit Sport in Blaze Orange Metallic. Now, this video is going to be about 4 different parts, all in one video, 4 different chapters. First, I'm going to start off with the history of the Honda Fit. Then I'm going to move on to my personal experiences with the car thus far. Then we're going to move on to an exterior and interior deep dive type of review. And then we will get out on the road and see how this thing drives. Starting off with the history, this car actually debuted as as the Jazz in Japan in 2001. So this is a 2008. The first model year for the United States was 2007, where it was sold in the United States as the Fit. So if you're any good at math, by the time this car came to the US, it was already in its 7th year of production, or about 8th year of production. So it came out in Japan first, then it went to Europe, and then between 2002 and 2005, it went to South Asia, Australia, then I believe South Africa. So by the time we got this car, it was already a couple years old to the rest of the world, but it was new to the US and Canada. So the 2008 Honda Fit was still in the first generation of the 3. There's the 2007-2008 generation, then 2009 to I believe 2014, and then 2015 to the last model year, which is 2020, unfortunately. So the one that you want to look for is the 2008 because from what I've heard, the 2007s have some oil consumption issues and they tend to leak water at the top of the rear hatch where it meets the body. So if you're looking for a Fit, 2008 is the one you want to go for. If you're looking for a first gen, which is the GT3. So there were 4 options, if you want to call them options, for the 2007-2008 model year. There was the base with a manual, the base with a 5-speed automatic, the Sport with a 5-speed manual, and the Sport with a 5-speed automatic. This is the Sport with the 5-speed automatic, making it the most expensive. I believe it was about $16,000 new, making it more expensive than its competitors at the time. Think Ford Fiesta, Toyota Corolla, Toyota Matrix, the Scion XD, other subcompact cars, but the Fit was also the best equipped, coming standard with ABS, power windows. It had heat and AC standard from the factory. You also had 6 factory airbags, giving this a 5-star safety rating for the NHTSA, making it one of the safest cars in its class when it was new. So the reason the Fit came to be was to replace the Honda City, which I believe in the US we only got 1 or 2 model years of, but it was a huge, huge seller in Japan, being the reason Japan got the Fit first sold as the Jazz. So with the Fit coming out in 2007, there were, I believe, 8 colors. But with the Sport, there were 2 colors that you could only get with the Sport, which is the Blaze Orange Metallic that I have, and I believe it was Blackberry Pearl were the only 2 colors you could get with the Sport trim, whatever you want to call it. So the Sport came with a few features that you didn't get on the base. So you got cruise control, you got a 6-speaker stereo instead of a 4, which is a 200-watt system instead of, I believe, 140 for the base. You got an aux jack, you got the body kit, which I'll show you when I do the exterior review, which was a front splitter, rear diffuser, 2 side skirts on either side, and the rear spoiler. You also got keyless entry, which is the same key as the Accord, Civic, HRV, CRV, all the Hondas of 2008. I believe the only Honda that had a different key was the S2000. So you get the same key as other models, but you only got keyless entry with the Sport. Additionally, you got cruise control, you got 15-inch alloy wheels, which I also obviously have instead of the 14-inch steel wheels. Now, the Fit Sport was a little bit heavier than the base model because of all those extra components. I believe the Sport with the automatic, which is the most expensive that I have and also the heaviest, was about $2,550. The lightest, which was the base with the manual, was about 2,400 pounds. So for reference, the EP3 Civic hatchback with the EP3 Civic Si that a lot of people compare this to was about 2,700 pounds. This is lighter than a lot of cars on the road at the time, and also a lot lighter than a lot of cars we have today. The engine that came in this car was, you only got one option in the United States, which was a 1.5 liter L15A engine. It was a single overhead cam, 16 valve, pretty standard stuff for Honda. But in Europe, with the Jazz, you got the option of, I believe it was a 1.3 liter diesel, of which we never got in the States, unfortunately. Not that many people would have probably bought it anyways, but you get a 1.5 liter gas engine in the United States. And along with that 1.5 liter gas engine, you get, Honda advertises 28 to 38 miles per gallon, but EPA standards changed from 2007 to 2008, so they cut it back from 38 highway down to 34. So Honda, like I said, Honda advertises 28. I typically in the city get about 27, and on the highway I do get, the highest I've ever gotten was about 34, 35, but expect if there's heavy traffic on the highway and you're not going at a constant speed, you might be closer to 32. Now, this is a 109 horsepower, 105 pound-feet of torque that you get from the L15A, which when you account for, that's 109 at the crank, by the way. So at the wheels, you're getting about 98. Which may not sound like a lot, but to put things into perspective, the original MX-5 Miata back in 1995 had 128 horsepower and weighed, I believe, a little bit less, about 2,400 pounds, or the same as the base model Fit. So it made about 15, 20 more horsepower, but weighed the same, if not less. So this is essentially a four-door Miata when you think about it in terms of proportions. Now, what made the Fit so special was, like I said, how it came with much more standard equipment than its competitors, which made it a little bit more expensive, but it also was more of an outlier. Like seeing one of these in 2008 was more interesting than seeing a Fiesta or a Corolla because there simply wasn't as many of them. Honda didn't sell as many as its competitors in the subcompact category, which is why they only made this car for a couple of years, which is very sad to see. You know, so many people nowadays want small cars, but when they did make small cars, nobody bought them. But that just proves that everything is cyclical. So with this car, I'll move on to the exterior after this, but I do want to explain my story with the car personally. This was my great aunt's car. Actually, I believe her husband bought it. So my great uncle bought this car brand new in 2008 for $16,000, or about $18,000, $19,000 in today's money. I do not have the original window sticker. That is one of the only things I don't have. I have the original title, owner's manual, and I have a sales brochure, but I do not have the original window sticker, unfortunately. He was the only owner of this car besides myself. We got the car in, I want to say 2021. It had about 170,000 miles. My mother drove it every once in a while. She had a truck at the time that she drove about half the time she drove this, and then the truck half and half. So I got the car last year in 2023. It was finally handed down to me, and the engine has 180, I think I just hit 188,000 miles, but the CV axles were just replaced at 175, give or take. Right after my mother bought this car, the driver's side CV axle just completely took a dump. And there was actually a recall for both sides for the boot on the CV axle that could crack and get corroded, which would lead to the axle itself just snapping like a pretzel. So both of those were replaced completely for free by Honda at, I think, 175. So my engine has 188, but my axles only have about 10 or 12,000 miles on them. And additionally, there were some other recalls for this car that we took care of. That's just what happens when you buy a first generation car. There's going to be some minor issues. The driver's and I think passenger side window switch was considered a fire hazard. There was a few cases of them catching on fire while you were driving, so Honda sent out a recall for all of them. I believe there was also a recall for one of the airbags. I think it was the passenger airbag had a recall. I might be getting confused with the Civic at the time. but all the recalls that this car had have been replaced, so it's, I don't want to say a brand new car because that'd be a little far from the truth, but it is, for lack of a better term, a brand new car. Like I said, I've put about 6,000 or 7,000 miles on the car myself in the last, I've only had my license for about 6 months, but I've taken this car all over the world, or at least all over the East Coast, that is. And when I do the exterior in a moment, I do want to apologize about how dirty it is. Last weekend, or about 2 weeks ago, I was driving up to New York City, and when I was on Interstate 78, they were spraying anti-icing treatment on the road, and that is all over the back of my car, so I'm very sorry for how ugly the back is. When I get time to wash it, I will, don't worry. But next we will move on to the exterior and then the interior, and then we'll take this bad boy out on the road. So starting with the exterior, the first thing I want to go over is how small this car is. I have a relatively standard 2-car garage, and I do have this thing kind of sticking out a little bit, so I had enough room up in the front here when I was filming the intro. But this car is hardly 5 feet wide, and I think a little more than like 10 or 11 feet long, but the side profile is still about half the size as most modern cars on the road today. Starting up with the front, you have paint-matched interior of your headlights. Sorry, mine are a bit foggy. But so every different fit will have a different color on the inside of the headlight to match the exterior. You also get paint-matched mirrors, which may not sound like a lot today, but in 2008 that was considered a feature. You have fog lights, which you only got on the Sport model. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the beginning, but the fog lights were exclusive to the Sport. You have the 15-inch alloy wheels that were also exclusive to the Sport. And additionally, you have the front splitter, the side skirts, and then if we move around to the back, you also have the rear spoiler and the rear diffuser that were exclusive to the Sport. Now, not every Sport you see will have those options because they were factory installed options, meaning that they were not put on from the factory. They were installed at whatever dealership you bought them at. So the interior, you'll notice, is very reminiscent of Civics at the time. This window switch right here is actually straight out of an EP3 Civic, and the antenna is actually the same as the Honda Element and S2000. So moving on to the interior, it's very spacious. It doesn't feel nearly as small as you would think it does looking on the outside, but one thing that you have a lot of is simplicity. Honda's main goal with this car was for it to be as cheap and easy to use as possible. But one thing that you gotta understand about Hondas is that cheap does not mean cheap quality. So you have your 3 HVAC switches, your AC and rear defroster, and this, one of my favorite parts about the car, you have this direct cable mounted recirc switch, which you can actually hear. You can hear it switching over with that cable link. You have single zone climate control, which I do wish that there was vents in the back, because sometimes in the summertime it gets a little hot in the back. But you do have your your power windows, and the driver's side is one touch on the way down, but is not one touch on the way up. You have your power locks, and then additionally you have your paddle shifters that you only got on the Sport, and then you have your Sport mode down here on the shifter. Now, the only thing I will say about this interior is the seats, which I will give you a slightly better angle of. The seats leave a little bit to be desired. They are very similar to the Civic seats. I think they're even the same headrests. But after a couple road trips in this thing, I will say the seats do leave a little bit of back support to be desired. Now, I am not very tall. I'm only about 5'6", but even I, feel a little bit uncomfortable after a couple hours in this thing. But moving on to the back seat, Honda calls these magic seats, and I'll show you why in a second. So first, you have the bottom of the seat, and the reason that this is so low right here, and again in the trunk, which I'll show you in a sec, is because the gas tank is underneath the driver and passenger seat as opposed to underneath the rear or in the trunk. And I'll show you why that's important. So you fold these seats up, and then fold this down, and you have this entire flat area that is actually on about the same level as your trunk. And what that means is that when you move this down and you take the headrest off move that down, and then fold your seats down, you'll notice the seats actually fold completely flat in line with the trunk. And that is because, again, the fuel tank is underneath the front seats. So this lays completely flush as opposed to most cars where this would be up at like a 45-degree angle. So that is the second variation of the Honda's Magic seats, is them laying flat. Then if you move this back up, move this down, you can actually recline the rear seats about 2 inches. You can see the difference right there. This reclines give or take 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and then you have slightly, it makes it a little bit more comfortable. I would actually argue that the back seats are a little bit more comfortable than the front seats. And then obviously in reverse, you just pull this, move it up till it clicks, and then replace your headrest like so. Oh my goodness. So another thing with the trunk is, because this car has such a low trunk line, or a low trunk floor is what I meant, you have much more space back here than a lot of its competitors. And with the seats folded down, you have, I don't remember the exact measurement, I want to say it was about 60 some odd cubic feet, but a lot more storage space than its competitors at the time. And you also get a automatic courtesy light here in the trunk as well. Now, like I said in the beginning, you have a lot of 2007 Fits that had an issue right here with water seepage. So if you just get if you have a 2007 and you recaulk these seals right here, then you should be fine. But another thing that a lot of people don't think about with the Honda Fit is the fact that, it's a hatchback, which means that it's very easy to reverse into parking spots. Or I should say parallel parking. Parallel parking in this car is so ridiculously easy. Somebody who's never been able to successfully parallel park in their life can hop in this thing and do it no problem. Now, I'm not sure if I went over the miles per gallon yet, but this thing gets 27 city and about 32, 34 highway. And with that, I typically average about 30 with mixed city and highway driving. So on average, it's about $35, give or take, to fill up from completely empty. So a half a tank is like $18, depending on where you are. Where I live, gas actually just recently came down. Gas is about $3.15, $3.10 a gallon. But you can easily drive for a week on like $5 worth of gas in this thing. It is insane. And that's the entire reason Honda designed this car, was to be cheap and easy to maintain for the layman, essentially. And you have a lot of simplicity that a lot of other manufacturers didn't think about. And that's what makes me so sad about how this car wasn't nearly as popular as it ought to have been. Now, with all that out of the way, we did the interior, we did the exterior, went over the history of the car. Next, we will take this bad boy out on the road. Alright guys, taking this bad boy out on the road. First we're going to do some highway driving, and then we're going to go hit some back roads and see how this bad boy handles. So while I wait for traffic, I'll explain a little bit about the mechanics of this car. So it is a drive-by-wire system, and it does have electric power steering. So essentially what that drive-by-wire means is, instead of having a instead of having a cable linkage to the throttle, is electronically controlled, which makes this car very touchy, and you have to be very light on the gas when you're coming from a complete stop, because this thing wants to get up and go. It is a very eager car. It's relatively high revving. You can obviously see red line's about 6,500, which, it being a single overhead cam, it's not as high revving as like a Civic. The Civics go to about 8,000. So basically, this car is a very free spirit, all right? It's not powerful, like I mentioned. It only has about 109 horsepower, but you don't need 200, 300, 400 horsepower in a car that only weighs 2,500 pounds. Like I said, it's basically a four-door Miata, and there's a lot to be said about how fun this thing is to drive. And I joke all the time with people about how it's basically a go-kart, and I say that because it is. It's a four-door go-kart. So you have the two paddle shifters, which obviously, if I were to flick down into third, it would stay in third for a second, then it goes back down to fourth. But if I put it into manual mode and I flick down into second, you can see there's an M next to the 3, and it'll hold the gears without being in sport mode, but only for a second or two. But once you are in sport mode, it'll stay in whatever gear you want, and it will not automatically upshift. So you can bang this thing off the rev limiter as much as you want. So basically, you can absolutely just beat the piss out of this car. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that. I love this thing. It's my pride and joy. But should you so choose, you can bang it off the rev limiter. And the steering in this car, the first thing I want to go over, is very, very tight. With that electric power steering, it feels very precise, and it takes corners absolutely on rails. I mean, you hardly even feel like you're taking a corner in this thing. And like I said, when we hit the back roads, I'll show you guys, you don't need 200, 300, 400 horsepower to have fun, because 100 horsepower is all you, I mean, you can floor it in this car and barely even break the speed limit. Hell, you probably won't even reach the speed limit depending on where you are. So if I can see if I can get around one of these people, I will just, once I hit one of these back roads, I'll try to do a 0 to 60 pull. And the fit is not fast. It is quick, but it is far from fast. 0 to 60 on this bad boy is about 8 seconds. If you have the manual, it might be closer to 6 or 7 seconds, but it is far from fast, but it's quick and it's eager. So I like to joke that it's sporty to 40. It feels quick until you hit about 40, 45, and then the power kind of levels off. But we will see what we can do with the back roads here. And another thing you'll notice is the road noise. Now, I do have brand new tires. These tires only have about 4,000 miles. I just got them replaced in July. But before, when I got this car from a relative, it had like China Bomb. I think they were called like Starfires or some BS. So the first thing you're going to want to do if you buy a Fit is get some new tires. I'm telling you, it makes a world of difference. Like, you wouldn't even believe. In a car that doesn't have a lot of sound deadening, the tires really do make or break the road noise that you're going to hear. And it's a very spacious cabin, but the reason it's very spacious is because there's not a lot in the cabin. So you do, it's kind of like you pay for that with having not a lot of sound deadening. It feels bigger than it is, but then it also feels louder than it is. I'm not sure how to explain that. But this car has a very, very small presence on the road. You don't realize how small it is until you step outside and you're like, holy shit, it's like I'm driving a toaster. But it is, on paper and in real life, a very small car, and it handles like a small car. So we will take this left up here, and we'll kind of get out in the country a little bit, and I'll show you guys what it's like to whip this thing around. But it's a very agile car. Like I said, steering is very precise. It loves being thrown around. It's very eager to get up in the rev range. VTEC, obviously, it's not true VTEC, being a single overhead cam at all. The quote-unquote VTEC is basically when you're driving around normally like I am now, this thing will be on one intake valve and 2 exhaust valves. But when you're driving in sport mode, and once you hit that VTEC, it opens the second intake valve, and that is your quote-unquote VTEC. So it's kind of like VTEC, kind of not. Hopefully I can get around this guy. We're hardly doing 25 and a 40. But like I said, this car is very eager to get up there in the VTEC, and it's not a very obvious, like, whoa, VTEC just kicked in. It's not, not very obvious, and you'll kind of hear it once that second intake valve opens. But you can't not have fun when you're driving this thing. It's basically what I'm getting at. You have a lot of guys who think that, it looks very unassuming. I mean, it looks like a commuter car because it is a commuter car. That's just what it is. But anybody who's ever driven this thing will tell you just how fun it is. I mean, it is. I've driven plenty of other cars in my time, and it is so fun. Like, you just truly can't not have fun when you're driving a Honda. And that's really, the most fun would probably be the manual. Like, I've heard great things about the manuals, how the clutch is super light, it's super easy to row through gears. And while I do wish mine was a manual, paddle shifters, I'll take what I can get. So we will take this left, and I will just give you a second to listen to it. corners absolutely on rails. And if you guys will bear with me while I head up into the mountains here, it's very easy to feel like you're going faster than you are. I mean, like when you're on the highway doing 70 or 80, it feels like you're doing a $110 because it's just so light. There's nothing to it. But simply put, you really just gotta give it all it has. I mean, you can't drive a Honda and not drive it full spirited. Don't mind the ping or clicking that you hear. We got some snow a couple days ago, so there's still some leftover salt on the roads. Now, unfortunately, because I live in the middle of nowhere, it's going to be a little bit of a drive until I can really get to the front roads, so I'll probably trim this part of the video out, but we'll see what ends up happening once I sit down and edit this. I call it the GoPro effect, where it doesn't look like you're going as fast as you are, and some of these roads might not look as curvy as they really are, so you guys have to bear with me here. I mean, on camera it probably looks like I'm doing 20 miles an hour, but trust me, you really just have to get out and drive one of these for yourself if you really want to make the most of it. A little bit of wheel chirp there. I don't know if you guys heard it. Yeah, what can I say? My car just makes so much power. Some nice horse shit on the road. Gotta love Pennsylvania. And tires really do make all the difference in this car. I mean, before when I had those China bombs, it just, like I said, it really didn't drive nearly as good as I knew it could have. And like I said, if you really wanted to, if you could somehow find some 15-inch summer tires out there and throw those on this thing, I'm sure it would be even more fun. But I mean, you just really gotta give it all you got, or give it all the car has to say, I should say. Actually, I tell you what, we'll go up north. Yeah, don't mind all the traffic. Sorry about that, guys. Got some more tire chirp there for you. Now, isn't that just fun? I mean, I grew up around Hondas all my life. You know, all my dad, all his brothers, they all had one, and they still do to this day. And you simply cannot, like, Hondas just have such an indisputable charm that, you know, I think a lot of other manufacturers really fail to capture. And really, all you got to do is just put your foot to the floor. Now, another thing I like about this car is that you can, just like I said, absolutely floor it at every corner and still get, you know, 25, 30 miles a gallon and not have to worry about it. I mean, same thing with the Miata, although the Miata has slightly worse fuel economy. I think it's like 21 city, like 34, or no, it's like 21 city, 27 highway or something like that. It's not bad, but the Miata also has a bigger engine. I think it's a 1.8 compared to this 1.5. So you really have to think about, you know, do you want to have slightly more power and slightly worse fuel economy for a car that is basically the exact same speed? In fact, I think the automatic Miata is actually a little bit slower than the automatic Fit, and the manual Miata might be a little bit faster than the manual Fit. So, but other than that, I mean, we're splitting hairs here, but see if I can do a quick 0 to 60 pull. Alright, there we go. That is 60 miles an hour. I'm going to back off a little bit because I think this road's only about 50. But, again, it's not a fast car, but you don't need a car that can do 200 miles an hour to have a blast. I mean, I have a blast even just driving to work in this thing, and it is just, like I said, my absolute pride and joy. And really, all you got to do is just mash the throttle a little bit, and it wants to go. It is a very eager little car. I mean, for something that was just sold to young people to be like a fresh out of college type car, it is everything you need it to be. And that's something to be said about basically any Honda, is Hondas have always been everything you need and nothing that you don't. And I couldn't think of a better way to describe this car. And you really just, like I said, you got to drive one for yourself. I can rave about how much I love this thing over and over again, but until you drive one for yourself, you will truly never understand how fun and just dorky this car is. It is a marvel that many manufacturers have yet to replace, and it's just sad that nobody wants subcompact cars anymore, and that nobody's making them because nobody's buying them. But that's just the reality